take a slow breath in and gently let it out. There's nothing you need to focus on tonight, nothing you need to remember. Just allow the words to arrive and fade away when they want to. Tonight, we're going to explore Stoicism and the society when it was born. Stoicism was born during a time of deep uncertainty, not in comfort or stability, but in a world that felt unpredictable, fragile, and constantly changing. It emerged in ancient Greece around the early 3rd century before the Common Era, in the aftermath of the collapse of classical city-states, when long-standing political structures were breaking apart and the familiar sense of civic identity was dissolving. For generations before, people had defined themselves primarily through their city, their public role, and their participation in shared political life. But as larger empires rose and power shifted away from local communities, many individuals felt disconnected, exposed, and unsure of their place in the world. Stoicism arose as a response to this condition, offering not promises of control over external events, but a way to remain steady within them. Its early thinkers were less concerned with building ideal societies and more focused on answering a quieter, more urgent question, which was how to live well when the world no longer feels stable or fair. The society in which Stoicism emerged was marked by constant movement, trade, cultural mixing, and political upheaval, as Greek influence spread across vast regions under imperial rule. People traveled more, lived among strangers, and encountered unfamiliar customs and beliefs, which weakened traditional sources of meaning rooted in ancestry and local tradition. In this environment, external success became unreliable, as wealth, status, and safety could be gained or lost quickly through forces beyond individual control. Stoicism responded by shifting the center of a good life inward, suggesting that stability should not depend on circumstances, but on the quality of one's judgment and character. Rather than teaching how to avoid hardship, Stoicism taught how to remain composed within hardship, accepting that change, loss, and uncertainty are natural features of life rather than problems to be solved. Early Stoic thinkers observed that much human suffering did not come from events themselves, but from the way people interpreted those events, especially when expectations collided with reality. In a world where political decisions were distant and often arbitrary, Stoicism offered a form of inner citizenship, where individuals could govern themselves even when they had little influence over the structures around them. This philosophy did not deny emotion or hardship, but aimed to reduce unnecessary distress by encouraging clarity about what lies within human control and what does not. Stoicism emerged in public spaces rather than private schools, often taught through conversation and reflection, emphasizing practicality over abstraction. It was not designed for a secluded elite, but for ordinary people navigating a demanding world, including merchants, soldiers, administrators, and later even rulers themselves. The Stoic view of society was shaped by the recognition that external order is fragile, but that moral order within a person can remain intact regardless of political conditions. This made Stoicism particularly appealing in times of instability, as it provided a sense of grounding without requiring withdrawal from life. Instead of retreating from society, Stoicism encouraged engagement, tempered by realism, asking people to act responsibly while accepting that outcomes are never fully theirs to command. The philosophy taught that nature operates according to its own logic, indifferent to human preferences, and that resistance to this reality often creates unnecessary frustration. By observing patterns of growth, decay, and change, Stoic thinkers concluded that acceptance is not weakness, but alignment with how the world already functions. In the social context of expanding empires and shifting power, Stoicism offered a form of emotional resilience that did not rely on optimism or hope, but on understanding and preparation. It encouraged people to anticipate difficulty, not to become pessimistic, but to reduce shock and resentment when challenges appeared. This approach helped individuals maintain dignity, even when facing loss, injustice, or decline in status. Over time, Stoicism spread beyond its Greek origins and was adopted and adapted within Roman society, where its emphasis on duty, endurance, and responsibility resonated deeply. Roman life was structured around hierarchy, obligation, and public service, often demanding personal sacrifice for collective stability. Stoicism provided a framework for fulfilling these demands without becoming consumed by them, allowing individuals to separate their sense of worth from their rank or success. In this way, Stoicism functioned both as a personal philosophy and a social stabilizer, encouraging self-restraint, fairness, and perspective in environments prone to excess and ambition. Importantly, Stoicism did not promise happiness in the sense of pleasure or comfort, but offered tranquility through understanding, teaching that peace comes from aligning desires with reality rather than bending reality to desire. It acknowledged that suffering is part of life, but insisted that suffering does not need to dominate the mind. This made Stoicism especially relevant in societies where control over one's future felt limited, as it reframed freedom not as power over events, but as freedom from being emotionally ruled by them. The birth of Stoicism reflects a moment in history when people sought stability not by escaping the world, but by learning how to stand within it without being broken by its changes. It offered a philosophy suited to long periods of uncertainty, encouraging patience, clarity, and self-governance when external guarantees could no longer be trusted. Looking back, it is impossible to not make a connection with our current world in 2026. Wars, declining population, artificial intelligence, stealing jobs, and a general uncertainty of how long our society will hold on before everything collapses are common subjects in today's conversations. How do the Stoic approach can help us in navigating this storm? Stoicism is built on a small number of core principles, not meant to overwhelm or impress, but to be returned to repeatedly, especially when life feels demanding, uncertain, or emotionally heavy. At its foundation, Stoicism begins with a simple observation that life contains events we can influence and events we cannot, and that much human distress comes from confusing the two. The Stoic approach does not attempt to eliminate difficulty or discomfort, but instead teaches clarity about where effort is useful and where acceptance brings relief. This distinction is not abstract, but practical, meant to guide daily attention rather than philosophical debate. In practice, Stoicism invites people to focus their energy on thoughts, judgments, and actions, while loosening attachment to outcomes, opinions of others, and external circumstances. In today's world where information, comparison, and uncertainty are constant, this principle alone offers immediate calm by reducing unnecessary mental struggle. When applied gently, it encourages asking a quiet question throughout the day, whether a situation lies within personal influence or outside it, and responding accordingly, with action where possible and release where not. Another central Stoic principle is the idea that events themselves are neutral, and that suffering often arises from interpretation rather than reality. This does not deny pain, loss, or injustice, but recognizes that the mind adds layers of fear, resentment, and anticipation that intensify distress. In modern life, this principle becomes especially relevant in moments of anxiety, overthinking, or emotional reactivity, where the initial event may be small, but the internal narrative grows large. Practicing Stoicism here means learning to pause between stimulus and response, noticing thoughts as interpretations rather than facts, and allowing space before reacting. This pause creates room for choice, making emotional regulation feel less like suppression and more like clarity. Stoicism also emphasizes the cultivation of virtue, not in a moralistic sense, but as a commitment to acting with integrity, fairness, and self-respect, regardless of circumstances. Virtue in Stoicism is not dependent on reward or recognition, but on alignment between values and behavior. In today's world, where validation often comes from external metrics such as approval, productivity, or status, Stoicism offers a stabilizing alternative, encouraging people to measure success internally rather than socially. This means acting well even when outcomes are uncertain, recognition is absent, or effort goes unnoticed. Practically, this might look like speaking honestly when it is uncomfortable, choosing restraint over impulse, or maintaining fairness when it is easier to ignore it. Over time, this internal consistency reduces anxiety by removing the need for constant external confirmation. Another key Stoic principle is the acceptance of impermanence, the understanding that everything subject to time will eventually change, decline, or disappear. Rather than viewing this as pessimistic, Stoicism treats impermanence as a reminder to appreciate what exists without clinging to it. In modern life, where attachment to stability, comfort, and identity is strong, this principle softens fear of loss by normalizing change. Practicing this does not require constant reflection on mortality, but gentle reminders that relationships, roles, and circumstances are temporary, encouraging presence rather than anxiety. This perspective can reduce the intensity of fear around aging, career shifts, or emotional transitions, allowing people to meet change with less resistance. Stoicism also teaches the value of voluntary simplicity, not as deprivation, but as resilience training. By occasionally choosing modest comfort, restraint, or silence, Stoics believed people could reduce dependence on excess and strengthen adaptability. In today's context, this principle can be practiced quietly, through moments of reduced stimulation, intentional pauses from consumption, or choosing contentment over accumulation. These small acts build confidence that well-being does not require constant input, preparing the mind to remain steady even when comfort is limited. Another important Stoic idea is the concept of perspective, the practice of stepping back mentally to view situations from a broader viewpoint. Stoicism encourages imagining how events fit within the larger flow of time, nature, or human experience, reducing the sense that any single moment defines everything. In modern terms, this can mean remembering that current stress, embarrassment, or frustration is temporary, shared by others, and unlikely to matter in the long arc of life. This perspective does not minimize experience, but places it gently in context, reducing overwhelm without dismissing feeling. Stoicism also places emphasis on preparation rather than prediction, encouraging people to accept that difficulty will occur without obsessing over when or how. This mindset allows individuals to meet challenges with readiness rather than shock. In daily life, this might look like accepting that misunderstandings, delays and disappointments are normal, reducing emotional spikes when they arise. By expecting imperfection, people preserve calm when things deviate from plan. Another Stoic principle involves responsibility without resentment, the idea that while individuals are accountable for their actions, they are not responsible for controlling others. This becomes especially relevant in modern relationships and workplaces, where emotional boundaries can blur. Practicing Stoicism here means doing one's part sincerely, while releasing the urge to manage reactions, opinions, or outcomes beyond personal influence. This reduces burnout and emotional fatigue, allowing effort without entanglement. Stoicism also encourages reflection, not as rumination, but as gentle review. Traditionally, Stoics reflected on their day to notice where behavior aligned with values and where it did not, without self-punishment. In modern practice, this can be as simple as quiet awareness, observing patterns rather than judging them, allowing gradual correction rather than pressure. This reflective habit builds self-trust over time, replacing guilt with learning. Importantly, Stoicism does not demand emotional numbness. It recognizes emotion as natural, but encourages proportion, preventing feelings from overwhelming reason. In today's emotionally intense environment, this principle supports balance, allowing people to feel without becoming consumed. Anger, sadness, and fear are acknowledged, but not treated as commands. Over time, this creates emotional steadiness rather than suppression. Stoicism ultimately aims to create freedom, not from life's difficulties, but from unnecessary suffering added by resistance, attachment, and unrealistic expectation. Its principles are meant to be applied quietly, without display, shaping how one meets ordinary moments rather than dramatic crises alone. In the modern world, Stoicism becomes less about mastering philosophy and more about cultivating calm attention, steady values, and realistic acceptance amid constant change. Stoicism also offers guidance on how to relate to other people, especially in situations where expectations, misunderstandings, or conflict arise. Stoic thinkers observed that much frustration comes from wanting others to behave differently than they do, forgetting that each person acts according to their own understanding, habits, and limitations. From a Stoic perspective, expecting universal agreement or consistent fairness is unrealistic and often leads to resentment. Instead, Stoicism encourages understanding others as they are, not as we wish them to be, while still maintaining personal standards of behavior. In modern life, this principle becomes especially relevant in social environments shaped by constant communication, opinion sharing, and comparison. Practicing Stoicism here means responding thoughtfully rather than reactively, recognizing that another person's words or actions reflect their internal state, not a personal attack. This shift reduces emotional friction and creates space for calm disengagement when engagement is unproductive. Another important Stoic idea is the practice of intentional perspective-taking, sometimes described as viewing oneself from above. This is not meant to diminish personal experience, but to soften its intensity by placing it within a wider context. By imagining one's concerns from a broader viewpoint, whether across time, geography, or humanity as a whole, Stoicism helps reduce the sense of urgency that often accompanies stress. In today's world, where problems can feel overwhelming due to constant exposure and amplification, this practice restores proportion, reminding the mind that while experiences matter, they are part of a much larger and ongoing story. Stoicism also addresses how to relate to success, reminding individuals that achievement does not guarantee fulfillment, and that external rewards are unstable by nature. From this perspective, success is something to appreciate lightly rather than cling to, knowing it can change without warning. Practicing Stoicism here means enjoying positive outcomes without tying identity or worth to them, reducing fear of loss and pressure to maintain status. This attitude creates freedom to engage fully without becoming anxious about preservation. Similarly, Stoicism provides tools for relating to failure without collapse, viewing setbacks as information rather than personal verdicts. In modern practice, this can mean responding to mistakes with curiosity rather than shame, adjusting behavior without self-criticism, and continuing forward without dramatizing difficulty. Stoicism also emphasizes consistency over intensity, valuing steady behavior rather than bursts of effort followed by exhaustion. This principle fits naturally into contemporary life, where burnout often results from pushing beyond sustainable limits. By focusing on what can be maintained calmly over time, Stoicism encourages pacing rather than urgency. Another area where Stoicism offers guidance is in dealing with uncertainty about the future. Rather than attempting to predict outcomes or eliminate risk, Stoicism encourages preparedness paired with acceptance. This means taking reasonable steps to plan and protect, while remaining mentally flexible if plans change. In modern contexts, this approach reduces anxiety around career paths, relationships, and long-term decisions, allowing engagement without paralysis. Stoicism also reframes the concept of control, suggesting that true control lies not in shaping circumstances, but in choosing one's response. This idea becomes especially calming in situations involving systems or institutions beyond individual influence, reminding people that dignity and agency remain intact even when outcomes are constrained. Another Stoic practice involves gratitude grounded in realism, appreciating what exists now without assuming permanence. This form of gratitude does not deny hardship, but balances awareness of difficulty with recognition of what remains intact. In daily life, this might appear as quiet acknowledgement of small, stable elements, such as health, shelter, or moments of peace, without turning gratitude into obligation or positivity pressure. Stoicism also encourages restraint in speech and judgment, recognizing that many conflicts escalate unnecessarily through impulsive expression. Practicing silence or measured response is seen not as avoidance, but as wisdom, allowing emotions to settle before words solidify them. This principle is particularly relevant in digital environments, where reactions are immediate and permanent. Choosing not to respond immediately becomes an act of self-respect rather than withdrawal. Stoicism further addresses how to live with moral clarity in imperfect systems, acknowledging that fairness is not always rewarded, and that good behavior may go unnoticed. Rather than using this as justification for cynicism, Stoicism teaches acting well for its own sake, trusting that integrity is valuable even when external validation is absent. This creates inner stability, independent of reward. Over time, this practice reduces bitterness and supports self-respect rooted in action rather than outcome. Stoicism also emphasizes the importance of adapting expectations to reality rather than forcing reality to meet expectation. This principle applies gently to daily inconveniences, delays, misunderstandings, and unmet plans, encouraging flexibility instead of resistance. In modern life, this adaptability reduces frustration by replacing entitlement with realism. Stoicism further invites reflection on mortality, not as a source of fear, but as a reminder of proportion. By recognizing life's finiteness, Stoicism encourages presence and care in everyday moments, reducing trivial worry and sharpening appreciation without urgency. This reflection is meant to be calm and grounding rather than dramatic, reinforcing the idea that time is valuable precisely because it moves forward. Ultimately, Stoicism does not seek to remove emotion, ambition, or desire, but to place them in balance with reason and acceptance. Its practices are quiet, repetitive, and unremarkable, shaping life through small adjustments rather than radical transformation. In a modern world filled with stimulation, comparison, and constant demand for reaction, Stoicism offers permission to slow down internally, to respond rather than react, and to remain steady even when conditions fluctuate. As you rest now, you do not need to follow each idea or remember how it applies. You can let the overall sense of calm resilience, measured attention, and gentle acceptance remain, allowing the mind to loosen its grip on outcomes, soften its judgments, and settle naturally into rest, where effort fades and sleep arrives without resistance.